Okay, I think we have everybody here. Welcome. We have a great group tonight. My name is Betsy Fisher-Martin, and I have the honor of being the IWF-DC chapter president this year. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our first event of 2022. It's focused on the book and you, where we promise to give you really the inside scoop on getting published and getting read. Leading that charge tonight, we are excited to have with us Bold Story Press publisher Emily Barrosse. And as a special bonus, we will also have several of our fellow IWF members who are published authors themselves here to share their wisdom with everybody. So we're excited to gather you all this evening. And I know we have some IWF members from other chapters here, so a special welcome to you. And I invite you just to jump in the chat and introduce yourselves so we know who's here. A couple of other Zoom notes for everybody. Please, during the presentation and meeting, keep your microphones muted. We will have a Q&A session. We are going to save plenty of time for questions. So during the Q&A, you can do one of three things if you want to ask a question. You can type the actual question in the chat. You can hit the raise the hand feature on Zoom, or you can just type in the chat, I have a question, and we will be sure to call on you, and you can actually ask your question, unmute your microphone and ask your question directly. We will also have plenty of links in the chat for a lot of resources that we're going to talk about tonight, as well as a link to our panels, all of their published books, if you're interested in reading more and getting copies of those books as well. So I invite you to check out the chat. Finally, I want to thank our programming team and chairs, Monica O'Neill and Jan Molino, for spearheading tonight's program. And of course, none of this would be possible without the help of Krista Reynolds. So thank you, Krista, for all of your organization for tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jan to get the program started. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. You know, Emily Barrosse is the founder and CEO of Bold Story Press, and she's a publishing house for women, which I find fascinating. She works with women authors who want to share their stories with the world. And Emily spent about 32 years of her career in the publishing industry, and she was the former vice president and editor-in-chief at McGraw-Hill, where she actually transformed her sluggish culture into a competitive, hungry, growth-driven business. But what I really love about Emily is that she believes that women are uniquely qualified to empower each other, and I'm sure that we can all agree with that. And even more, she feels we can be empowered through sharing their stories. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Emily. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you so much, Jan, and I'm so happy to be here. I wanted to share some information with all of you about the publishing industry today. This is kind of the least you should know about publishing if you've ever thought about writing a book. And in the course of that, I will share some of my story too. So I am Emily Barrosse, and it's actually been 35 years now since I first graduated from college and packed my little bag and ran to New York because I was going to be the next great editor who would find the next great Fitzgerald. Sadly, it didn't turn out that way, but it still turned out very well. I spent 32 years in traditional publishing houses in New York, in Philadelphia, in Chicago, in Boston. During that time, I worked with probably thousands of authors and published hundreds of best-selling books. Toward the end of my career, I was working in college textbooks, and I was a vice president, editor-in-chief of a division where we published 500 books a year. And a $500 million publishing program. And during that time too, I published the single most successful college textbook ever published in economics. So I've been doing publishing for a very long time, and I think I've seen it all. I've certainly seen a lot. Publishing today is very different than it was when I started out. when I started out, there were a lot of publishers, small publishers, medium-sized publishers, and the big guys. And over the past 30 plus years, the industry has been gobbling each other up. The big publishers bought the smaller publishers until there were fewer and fewer, until today, when we have the big five, the remaining five traditional publishers that are publishing trade books. None of them are US owned anymore. Sadly, McGraw-Hill was the last standout, and they sold their business to one of the European publishers. So all of the publishing houses are now owned by other countries. And of course, the retail outlets have changed completely. There used to be many bookstore chains. Now we are just left with really Barnes and Noble. And that's because as books became available to purchase on Amazon and on other digital platforms, more and more books were being bought there, which put out of business those smaller bookstores and even chains. And the industry has also been changing in other more subtle ways. So the very experienced editors, as they retired, the acquisitions editors were replaced with people who are as focused on marketing as they are on editorial. They aren't always called editors now. Sometimes they're called project managers, et cetera. And so the industry has been positioning itself to look more like the technology industry. If you want to write and publish a book someday, if that's been a goal of yours, I think you should ask yourself why. What is your motivation? I've worked with authors with a variety of motivations and seen them succeed, and a variety of motivations and seen them fail. But here are the most common ones that I've come across. You're passionate about a topic, and usually that's in the nonfiction arena, whether that's education or business. It's usually nonfiction writing, but you know a lot about the topic, you're passionate about it, and you want to share that passion with the world and infect others with that passion. Some authors talk about having a story inside that they need to get out. And sometimes they talk about that as an idea, and it's still up to them to flesh that idea out and to give that story structure and to write that story. Sometimes they talk about it as a story that's fully formed inside of them, and really they're just acting as the channel for getting it onto the page, and then they bring it to a publisher. I have seen authors who claim that be successful, and I've seen authors who claim that to also fail. It is an experience I hope to have someday. Some authors write to make money, and the authors who intend to make a living out of writing are writing many books, often a book a year, because if you are a professional writer publishing to make money, the larger your backlist is, the more revenue you're bringing in. Some authors, and usually these authors are entrepreneurs, write to establish themselves as an authority in their field. It's interesting when an entrepreneur is introduced as an author, people instantly think of them as an expert. Whether or not they self-published that book and uploaded it onto KDP, whether or not that book ever sold any copies at all, when people hear you are an author, some percentage of them are going to just assign you authority, credibility, expertise because of that title. And so entrepreneurs are more and more frequently finding that they need to author a book in order to enhance their brand and drive their business growth. And then finally, some authors write to leave a legacy, and they tend to be the memoir authors, but some write fiction. They want to leave something on this earth after they are gone. You all also should be thinking about for whom you are writing your book. And I know, and if I can ask those of you who are not on mute to put yourself on mute now, it will help with background noises. Thank you. It's important to think about, to have a clear idea of who your reader is when you're writing. And so taking some time, I used to give my authors the marketing questionnaire to fill out before they started writing their book, because I wanted them to develop as complete a picture as they could of their reader. Who out there is going to want to read your book? Who will pay for your book? And that's an important question, because some people will only wait until they can take the book out of the library, wait until they can borrow it from someone else. So you want to write a book that people will pay for. What do you know about them, and how will you reach them? You may also need to ask yourself some questions. If you want to become a published author, are there any changes that you need to make in your own life? I love this quote. I've always found it to be true for myself. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And so if you are someone who's been talking about writing a book someday, you know, and having a clear sense that that's a goal you want to achieve, but your day-to-day routine has not changed, and you don't have any written pages, and you have not made any progress, I think it's time to consider that you need to make some changes to your day-to-day routine. And I'm a big proponent of developing a daily writing habit, and we'll get to that in a minute. I share this because in my experience in working with women authors, well, I love this quote from Marianne Williamson in any respect, but I also find that it's helpful for women authors to remember this, because women suffer from perfectionism in a way that men do not. And perfectionism is a real obstacle when it comes to writing. It makes it much harder for the author to let go of the manuscript and say, okay, you know, I've completed it, it's time to turn it over to someone else to give me feedback. So in this quote, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. And I share that also because there have been many times in my career where I have felt that fear about being a fraud. And I know that I am not the only woman who has experienced that. And in fact, Michelle Obama admits to it, and Oprah admits to it. So it's a fairly common phenomena. And I think that sometimes when women sit down to think about writing a book, especially in nonfiction, they think, oh, I'm not expert enough, or someone else more knowledgeable will write it. I would argue, and I do argue, that you should write this book. I think there is so much information and expertise and wisdom that women have to share in the world, and are not enough of them are yet doing so. I'm going to talk quickly about the 5 basic publishing phases. There is writing, editing, design, production, and the launch, which is about promoting and selling your book. With writing, there is no one way to write. And we all know that, whether or not we've written a book, we've all written business correspondence, we've all had to write in our careers. Some people sit down at the screen and they just download all of their thoughts, all of their ideas, all of their questions about the topic. They download it onto the page, and then they start to work through that big pile of content until the content starts to take shape, and then they continue to massage and shape and create their writing. Some writers are much more methodical, much more maybe self-disciplined, although that may not be the right term. They start with a table of contents, and they work through the process, adding more detail and more content as they go, fleshing out that table of contents in draft after draft. And so many of my writers would start with a table of contents, and then they would add several paragraphs to describe what happened in each chapter in that table of contents. And then they would begin on the chapters, where they would create the structure or the bones of the chapter. And they would go back and add more and more layers of detail. There is not any one writing style that will guarantee you success or guarantee that you will fail. You have to find the writing style that works best for you. Having said that, I strongly recommend that if you've never taken a writing class or read the abundance of good books out there on writing, I strongly recommend that you do, because we all have more to learn about writing well. We can all improve on the craft, and there's so much good content out there to help. Almost every author I've worked with has to do some form of research in the process of creating their book. Certainly nonfiction writers do, and certainly education, textbook authors do, but also fiction writers often do. If they are placing their story in a period of time in history, that it's important that they get the facts right, because if you don't, if you make even the small mistakes, if your reader catches those mistakes, you lose credibility as the author. And so most authors have to do some form of research in the process of writing their book. Some authors sit down, write their book over time, and never show it to anyone else, never share it with an editor until they have completed their first draft. Others want help right from the beginning, and that's not unusual today, and especially for busy professionals who are juggling professional careers with taking care of families and also writing a book on the side. And so the profession of book coaches has exploded in recent years. And book coaches are usually people who are trained as editors, often as developmental editors, but who also understand how to work with writers to motivate them, to hold them accountable, to give them feedback as they're working through the writing, so that they accomplish their goal and they get to the end of the draft of the manuscript. And some authors don't have the time or the interest in writing at all, but they want to share their story with the world. Or they may be an entrepreneur who sees the real value in being able to say, I'm an author of a book. And those authors work with ghostwriters. And ghostwriters, you have to have some resources to hire ghostwriters. The good ones are not cheap, but usually that process looks like sitting down with a ghostwriter for several long interviews where you share the content, you share the stories, the anecdotes that you want in the book, and the ghostwriter goes off and writes your book for you. As I said, I am a big proponent of developing a daily writing habit. Really, all the writers I know who have been successful have done it that way. It's writing can be so difficult. It can be so challenging to sit and look at that blank screen and wait for the content to come. And so it's important that you develop that habit because as Stephen King says in his book on writing, when he first started writing, he would go into his office, sit down at his desk, open his computer at 7 a.m. He went in every day from 7 a.m. until noon. And he believes that in time, he trained his muse, his creative self, to show up at 7 a.m. every day when he opened that computer. And I think that happens for all of us. When you develop that habit, you will find that the writing starts to come more easily and more quickly, and you have a much greater chance of reaching your goal of completing a manuscript. So I recommend that you write every day. You must learn to self-edit, and any writer knows that. I have never gone back over my writing and not found errors, either because I was in a hurry and I leave out words, or because I missed something. But self-editing is an important part of the process. And equally important is getting feedback from some objective readers. And by objective, I mean someone other than your family and friends who love you. Most family and friends don't really know how to give constructive feedback on writing, and they love you. They don't want to hurt you or make you feel bad. And so they will focus on the things that they do like about your writing and share their feedback about that. And they won't say anything at all about areas where you need improvement. So it's important that you have others with some skill level. It could be a beta reader. It could be a peer in a class you're taking where you agree to read each other's chapters and give each other feedback, or it could be an editor whom you hire. But we all need objective feedback on our writing. It makes our writing stronger. And please, if you want to write a book, a good book, read good books. When you are reading, you are seeing all of the different ways that skilled writers deliver content in beautiful ways. If you intend to write a memoir one day, I strongly recommend that you read a few of the best-selling memoirs and get a sense of how people use different techniques in memoir writing with skill. There's nothing like seeing it in action in a good book. Editing is critical to all writers, I believe. I've never seen an author who didn't need an editor. I've never seen a manuscript that didn't need some editing. And there are a few different types of editing. Proofreading is the simplest type of editing. It happens after composition, after the book has been typeset. And the proofreader reads for usually for punctuation, for errors, for misspellings, for missing letters or missing parts of words, or any spaces that were introduced in the process of typesetting the book. Copy editing is the form of editing that most of us think about when we think about editing, and a good copy editor will read your manuscript line by line and give you feedback on grammar, on punctuation, on style. Most publishing houses use a style manual and make sure that all of the books they publish adhere to that style manual. We use the Chicago Manual of Style. Good copy editors can also help you with dialogue. If your dialogue is stilted, they can help you with pointing out where material is not clear and needs either more explanation or some examples to drive home the content. And finally, developmental editing is the most expertise kind of editing that that you can bring on. And a good developmental editor can feel like a partner in the process. A good developmental editor is looking at the manuscript from 100 feet up. And so they're looking at your story arc. They're looking at your the tension that you're creating in your writing that makes the reader want to continue to turn the pages. They're looking at your character development, your dialogue. A good developmental editor will point out to you where you need to change your writing. And sometimes they'll give you examples of how they would say it to help you over that obstacle. Good developmental editors, again, are not inexpensive, but they are worth their weight in gold. Design is usually the part of the process that most of my authors enjoy the most once they've completed the manuscript, because everyone loves to see their first book cover. And in the process of design in production, we have our designers meet with our authors and the editors to talk through what the book, who the book is intended for, what the book's mission is, what the look and feel is that the author wants to convey to their reader. We ask our authors to bring examples of books to these meetings where they show us the kinds of covers that they don't like, and they show us the kinds of covers that they love. And we talk in detail about both the exterior design, which is the cover, front, back, and spine, and the interior design, which is what's happening on the pages. And even if you have only a black and white book, you still have to, a designer still has to make the decisions about what fonts you're using, what your chapter openers look like, how you're treating different elements in the book, like bulleted lists or your footnotes. So it's more complicated often than my authors recognize, but the process is one they almost always enjoy. And production, I've kind of lumped everything else under this part of the process. Good production managers shepherd your book from that finished manuscript stage through the design process and through all of the decisions that have to be made before you get to the printed book. And if you are someone who's thinking about self-publishing someday, and there's no question that everyone here is capable of self-publishing. There is so much information on the internet now about how to self-publish that anyone can educate themselves in order to do so. But you will have to make decisions about things like your trim size. How big should your book be? Should it be 5x8 or 6x9 or one of the 50 different trim sizes that Amazon or the distributors give you? And usually that decision is kind of dictated by the market, the genre. Memoirs are almost always 6x9. Novels are often 6x9. They can be 5x8. So trim size is one decision you have to make. Of course, the decision about, do you want the book in paperback form? Do you want it in a hardcover? Do you want a jacket? Do you want an ebook, an audiobook? What color paper do you want your book printed on? What weight paper do you want your book printed on? If you're publishing, the traditional book in the trade market is printed on 50-pound paper. Usually it's cream, but it can be white also. If you are printing a 4-color book with 4-color images, you'll want 70-pound paper or even 100-pound paper, and you'll want that paper coated so that the 4-color ink does not get absorbed into the cotton of the page, which will make that image look blurrier. You want the paper to be coated so that the images are crisp and clear. And so all of those decisions are decisions to be made in that process of production. During the production process, we also do the metadata research, and that's an important step if you want your book to be found on Amazon. There's so much to say about metadata research, but Google it if you don't know anything about it, because it matters in terms of Amazon offering your book up when someone searches in the screen for memoirs. How well you did that metadata research is going to have an impact on whether or not your book comes up. And then finally, the ebooks also have to be formatted and created in a special file format in order to be uploaded onto Amazon and to the other 9 or 10 ebook publishing platforms. Launching your book is all about promoting and selling your book. If you are self-publishing, of course, you will have to understand how to promote and sell your book. If you work with a hybrid publisher, which is what Bold Story Press is, you will be involved, very involved, if not exclusively involved in promoting and selling your book. But I can also tell you that if you go with a traditional publisher, you will also be involved in promoting and selling your book. And it's why the information that agents ask for and traditional publishers ask for it, we all ask for it, is who is your community? How large are they? Do you have a following on social media? Do you have a direct mail list to whom you can mail when your book publishes to tell them the book is available for sale? We don't know exactly how many books are being published every year now because Amazon does not release those numbers, but we know it's over 1 million books a year. And when you consider how many books that is, the sheer volume, the noise of all of those books out there, it has become increasingly more challenging to find your way through all of that noise to find your readers. And so it's why traditional publishers now really, I hope, are always transparent with the authors that we expect you to be involved in promoting this book, because no one has a budget big enough anymore to promote books the way they need to be promoted and sold. And I can tell you from my own experience at McGraw-Hill and other major publishers that our marketing team had a budget every year. It was never enough to cover all of the books. And so with the new books, who were especially from unknown authors, often what they did was they threw the books into the deep end of the pool and they waited to see which ones rose to the top. And so if the book started to sell on its own, essentially, and I don't mean literally, of course, they put it in the catalogs and they had the salespeople, educated the salespeople about the book, but they were not spending money on advertising on these books and promoting them the way they were with the books that were sure bets until they saw that the book had legs. And then they would start to invest some marketing money. So regardless of who you publish with, you will be involved in promoting and selling your book if you want it to be successful. And to do so, I recommend to our authors that they create a book launch team months before the book publishes. And that's usually your favorite people in the world, friends and family, the people who will buy your book because they love you. You ask them to buy your book and read it and leave a positive review on Amazon and on Goodreads. The more positive reviews you have on Amazon, again, the more frequently your book is going to come up in the search process. You will want a social media campaign, and that means posting about your book and telling little vignettes and stories on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok. Of course, if you have a mailing list, you're going to want to mail to your list to tell them about your book. And you will want critical editorial reviews if you're working with a traditional publisher, they may send them off for critical review, but more and more frequently now it's possible to buy a critical review on some credible sites, including Publishers Weekly and Kirkus. And those reviews cost between $300 and $500. They will write a review of your book, and then you can decide if you want to include any quotes from that review in your launching and selling of the book. If they will not promise you a positive review, they simply promise a review. And so if they don't like it, they will still pay on that. There are a few different types of publishers that I've referred to already this evening. I'll just quickly tell you what the differences are. Traditional publishers are the big five, the Penguins, HarperCollins. It was about 35 years ago when I was starting out, a friend, we were both editorial assistants making $10,000 a year. She went the trade route, I went the nonfiction route, and she retired recently from the position of children's and young adult fiction. She was the editor-in-chief of those lists at HarperCollins. And she told me that it was 25 years ago that the HarperCollins, I believe, was the first publisher to say, we will no longer accept unsolicited manuscripts. We are putting gatekeepers in between us and the public. And it's when the agents became a prerequisite to having a traditional publisher look at your material. And they did that because they had reached the point where they were receiving 25,000 unsolicited manuscripts a year, and they simply did not have the staff to go through all of those books. And so all of the publishers followed suit, all using agents to be the gatekeepers. And so it's now true that you cannot get your manuscript in front of a traditional publisher without an agent. A traditional publisher usually pays some small advance between $5,000 and $15,000, though they can go much, much higher. And they pay for all of the costs associated with developing, designing, editing the book. When the book publishes, they recover some portion of their costs, their investment, before they start to pay you royalties. They also recover that advance before they start to pay you royalties. And then the advance is usually in the 8 to 12% range. So you receive 8 to 12% of the profit. With self-publishing, you'll have to find your own editors and pay them, and find your own designers and pay them, and educate yourself about the process. But in the end, you will receive all of the royalties. And with hybrid publishers, which are a fairly new phenomena, we live with one foot in both worlds, and in the sense that at Bold Story Press, all of the editors and designers who work with me have 20 plus years of experience as editors and designers with major publishers. And so the product is going to be as professional as any traditional publishers, but we charge our authors a flat rate up front, and which requires our authors to share in the risk, in the sense that they're covering the costs for editorial and design, but at the end of the process, they receive 60% of the royalty instead of that 10% that they would get from a traditional publisher. And then finally, the last category is editorial service provider. They are not real publishers. Hybrid publishers are, the good hybrid publishers are curated. We do not publish everything we receive. We reject about 75% of what we receive. Editorial service providers will publish any manuscript they receive if you can pay the fee. And so essentially they will hire the editor for you and the designer, et cetera, and help you to publish the book. But they're providing a service. They're not true publishers. Love this quote. Those who tell the stories rule the world. 18 months ago, I started Bold Story Press because I thought the world was in a bit of a mess. And I felt strongly, and still do, that if more women were in positions of power in Congress, in the media, in you name it, that the world would be a better place. And I realized that during my 32 years in the industry that women faced real obstacles in the publishing industry, and there was a real distinct bias against women, and that I had perpetuated that bias unwittingly. And so I thought one of the ways that I could atone for that was to publish only women at Bold Story Press. And that's the reason that we publish only women. And I strongly believe that the girls and the young women of the world need more stories, more stories of success, stories of failure, more role models who are women. And so I strongly encourage women to publish their stories and put them into the world, however you do it. Bold Story Press, you can find us at boldstorypress.com. And if you are on social media, I would appreciate it if you would like us or follow us. And finally, if you want to write and publish a book someday, I hope it's clearer now that you should have a plan. When I give these webinars, normally I tell everyone who attends that I am happy to set up a one-on-one conversation about your writing goals. And if you would like to have a conversation with me, I would love to hear from you, and you can reach me at emily@boldstorypress.com. And that is my story, and I'm sticking with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. That was fantastic. Really, really fantastic. And I'm sure everybody enjoyed it as well. I'm just going to put a little side note here. Krista, I don't know how you're going to do the next part, but I have changed the order of the authors, so I hope I haven't messed you up. So, at IWF-DC, we just have so many authors. I was so surprised. And it's really exciting that, the five women that we're going to meet tonight put their hand up and said, yes, I want to talk to you about my book, and they can remember when they wrote their first book. So let me tell you who we're going to hear from tonight. We're going to hear from Sara Gay Forden, who is a writer and editor who specializes in stories that involve big business and big personalities. And you may recognize her book because of the new movie that's out, The House of Gucci. And so we're just very, very honored to have her. Secondly, our next author in the order will be Stephenie Foster. And Stephenie is a founding partner of Smash Strategies. And that's a consulting firm that provides strategic advice to ensure that investments in women and girls are effective and transformational. And her new book is called Take Action, Fighting for Women and Girls. And we're delighted to have you. After that, we are going to hear from the Honorable Nancy Harvey Steorts, president of her own company and out with her latest book, Safe Living in a Dangerous World. And next, we have Rohini Anand, CEO of Rohini Anand, LLC. And some of you may recognize her name. She's a company that's focused on strategic global diversity, equity, and inclusion. And her new book is called Leading Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, a Guide for Systemic Change in Multinational Organizations. And last but not least, we will hear from Monica O'Neill, CEO of Enso Advisors, which is a comprehensive strategic consulting firm that focuses on equity, capital formation, marketing, and products. And her book is called Bear Needs a Home. And this is a lovely children's book, which I shouldn't be saying this, but my nieces adored it. So we're going to start. We're going to start with Sara. And our authors are just so very talented, and some have written many books, and others have published their very first book. But one thing that they share is they went through all of the same things when writing the first book. You know, the trials, the tribulations of just writing the book, and then the bad part comes. The really hard part, as Emily says, getting it published. So each author is going to answer the very same question. You have 5 minutes to answer this one question. So Sara, we'll start with you. Your very first book. Can you remember that? Your very first book. So what do you wish you knew before you started, and what would you have changed in the process?
So the most important thing that I wish that I knew was that you have to give yourself time to get lost in your book. And I'm a very disciplined, organized person. I get things done. I had my proposal, I had my chapter outline, I had my sample chapter. I had gotten my agent, and I wanted to talk about the importance of getting help. And Emily, so much of what you said really resonated with me. So really fantastic presentation and great detail. But I went through a period of just really being lost. And I went through the writer's block period. I ended up, spending like a month on the first chapter that I ended up just putting aside and starting on the second chapter. And I ended up pulling all the material out of that first effort and putting it in 3 different chapters. And then I spent a lot of time kind of with my head in my characters and in the story. And even though I wrote a nonfiction book, this is the new edition, House of Gucci. The first edition has the red cover, but this has an updated afterword that talks about the last 20 years, because I wrote this book 20 years ago. And so it's had a second life. And I'm happy to talk in the Q&A about how your book kind of can become a movie. But I think right now we wanted to focus on actually writing a book. So in that context, I think it's really important to have help. And so the first thing I did, and this was 20 years ago, I was living in Milan. I didn't feel very plugged into the New York publishing world. And it was right about the time where, as Emily said, the market was transitioning from people being able to sort of represent themselves and people needing an agent. And I got an agent from, I didn't even know how I was going to get the agent. So I asked 2 of my friends who lived in Milan, who worked in publishing, their advice, and they gave me 3 names. And the first one was Ellen Levine, who at the time was known for being the agent on The English Patient. And so they said, Ellen is the best. Try to get her. If she says no, then go on to the other 2. So they gave me a plan. And I wrote Ellen a letter. I had attached some of my clips from Women's Wear Daily, where I was writing at the time. I asked her for an appointment. I was going to be in New York visiting, and she gave me the appointment. So that was the beginning of my journey. And she has just proven an invaluable advisor, mentor, friend. I got to take her to the premiere in New York. And she and her team have also been phenomenal for negotiating all the foreign language editions. So Gucci is now in more than 12 different languages. And I could never have handled that whole process by myself. So it's great to have a structure. And I did ask her if she's willing to have people contact her. And so she said, you feel free to reach out to her through her group. She's now with a firm called Trident Media in New York. She's being very selective about what she takes on, but she could always pass you on to someone else if she doesn't take you. The second thing, and please let me know when I'm up on my time. I think it's very important to have your own editor. And Emily mentioned this. I mean, the editors at the publishers are more marketing now. They have to identify books that have potential. And I should just note, Gucci was not an instant sell. We took Gucci to 9 publishers before the 10th one picked it up. And it was Betty Kelly at William Morrow. And many of the people who rejected it didn't know why people would want to read a book about Gucci. They thought it was far-flung from America's shores. They thought it was too specialized. They didn't like it. They didn't think it had potential. Betty Kelly had been an editor at Cosmopolitan magazine, so she understood fashion. She was renovating an abbey in Tuscany with her second husband. So she got the Italian story, and she got the Florentine sort of family dynasty story. and she jumped on it. And while I was writing the book, William Morrow was acquired by HarperCollins. So when I turned in the manuscript and when it was published, it was actually HarperCollins that published the book. So that's also an example of the consolidation in the publishing world that Emily's talked about. And just a little aside, my day job now is covering antitrust policy. And I was very interested to see that the Justice Department sued to block the merger between Random House and Simon Schuster. And the main analysis that they're putting into that is that they felt this merger would actually depress the amounts of advances being given to authors. So it's all about protecting and promoting competition in the world of creativity, of writing, of authorship. So in terms of getting your own editor, I was very fortunate that my mom was a professional editor, and she had retired and she had time on her hands, and she asked her husband to do the shopping and do the cooking. And for about a month before I turned in my manuscript, we passed the chapters back and forth. I was in Italy, she was in Arlington, and I would give her my chapter and she would work on it and leave me bold-faced questions and clips and suggestions at the bottom of the file. And I would pick it up in the morning when I came in, and we worked through the whole book this way. And it made it infinitely a better manuscript. And there was a key issue that I wanted to address, and that was that I felt that I was a business writer, not like a fashion writer. And I wanted to really tell the story of the business behind the brand. And I was weaving together the family saga with the business story, and it was a rise and fall and rise again. And the first draft of the manuscript that I turned in, Betty thought it was too heavy on the business. And she's like, go more on the family saga. That's what people want to hear about. And I didn't want to give that up. And so with my mom, and this is what I guess you would call the framing editor role, we took every chapter and we looked at my material and we took the most sensational anecdotes or moments that I had in that chapter and we front loaded them. And this is very not rocket science. We just front loaded the best stuff into the beginning of the chapter. And then I wove in the business stuff behind that. So when I said it in the manuscript again, I actually didn't take out any of the business material, but I made it more palatable and accessible to the reader. So it's more like spoon feeding.
Well, I hate to stop you because I could listen all night. This is amazing. But we will come back to you. And thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we're going to change directions here a little bit. And now we're going to speak with Stephenie Foster. And Stephenie, I know you've written a couple books and you're on to your next one. So same question. Can you remember that first book?
Yes. Hi. I was just hearing some pinging in the background. Hi. Thanks so much. And I'm really happy to be on this panel. I'm actually calling from Albania, which is where I am for work. So I'm a little tired. So hopefully I will be with it throughout the presentation. But I wanted to focus on a couple of things because I have written a couple of books and then I'm co-writing a third book, which is a textbook and very different than the book I just wrote. So the book I just wrote, which is like the polar opposite really of Sarah's book in a way, it's right here. If you can see it, it's called Take Action, Fighting. Oh, there you go. Fighting for Women and Girls. And it's really about taking all of the sort of passion that I have and interest in ensuring that, young women particularly are able to really take their interest in social change and their interest in making the world a more equitable place and learn some kind of things that have worked in other places, whether it's in the United States or other countries, have access to resources that really have been helpful to highlight issues, again, whether those are books or movies or understanding who role models and really having a sense of how you take all of that and become an effective advocate in 4 particular areas, which are women's economic empowerment, political participation, girls' education, and addressing gender-based violence. So it's a very practical book and very different than what I'm, starting on soon, which is, or have just started on, which is a very academic book, heavily researched, very heavy on footnotes, and it's just a very different process. So, but does bring me to what I wish I'd known was when I was writing this book, I actually did struggle with who my audience was a lot. And I at first wanted the book to be much more about foreign policy or international affairs solely, which is what I do in my day job, or my job, which I'm now, in addition to my firm, I'm also in a short-term job at the State Department. So I was very focused on those issues around foreign policy. And I really had to struggle with understanding that if I was going to write a book about advocacy and really trying to showcase what I had seen had worked or not worked in various venues, that this wasn't going to be a sort of heady book about foreign policy or something that was, in a lot of ways, very, talking to the other like 12 people in the world who think about foreign policy. And I think that I did have a struggle with that. And it's not so much that I wish I'd known to be focused on my audience. I think I wish I had been able to be more clear about that in my own mind as I was writing this book, because I did sort of stop and start a few times because I got kind of frustrated with not kind of understanding where I was going to take the book. And I think that's a really important thing. And I agree with letting yourself get lost or being okay with the fact you don't know everything or quite where it's all going to go, because for me, that was part of the process of putting this together in a way that was very usable. I also did some things that I thought were helpful to me, again, to get at this audience question and to get at the kind of language that I thought was most interesting to that audience. I paid for some kind of survey research, very short focus groups on what kind of how women sort of in the 18 to 35-year-old kind of demographic, how they thought about advocacy, the words that they reacted, to in a much more positive way. What did they think they needed in terms of resources for advocacy? Because I am certainly not in that demographic. And I think I had to be very careful about not wanting to seem like I was being preachy to a group of readers who were much younger than I. Although not to say it's only focused on that group. I certainly have had a lot of people who have bought the book and been helpful to me, including Nina McLemore, who's on this call, who hosted a book talk, who aren't in the 18 to 35-year-old category. But I did think that was a really important audience for me. And so I spent time trying to understand what that audience, how they would take in information, and what kind of language they would find the most accessible. The other thing I do wish I had thought about more or understood more was really the usefulness of the book as a marketing kind of tool for me, my business. I knew that was something that was very important, but I hadn't focused as much on all of the work that goes into that and really the need to start that kind of marketing thought process earlier, probably in the writing process than I did. I did end up hiring someone to help me with promotion and social media, and that's been great. I do think if I had started earlier, it might have just been a little bit more smooth, and it would have, the scheduling of events and the scheduling of Twitter chats and all those things might have, happened a little bit more contemporaneously with when the book was released. And so I think those are really important things for me. I think the third thing I wish I had known, and I guess I still kind of wish I knew it, is that I think you have to just decide that the book, and Emily touched on this, doesn't have to be perfect in a way. Of course, you want it to be the best that it is. But I also struggled with thinking, through, is this really sort of a book that would define kind of me? And I decided that it defined part of what I've done in my career, not all of it. certainly. And this other book I'm co-authoring, which is on feminist foreign policy, a very different book, a very different topic, and a very different side of the work that I do and things that I have taken on in my life. So I think seeing this as, for me, one part of how I talk about what I do, and understanding that it's only part of it, and not feeling like I had to write a book that sort of defined me in every way and I could use in every way to talk about me and my work and all the variety of things that I've done. So I'm going to stop there. I found the process challenging, fun, and frustrating all at the same time. And I did really enjoy it. And I am really looking forward to hearing what other people have to say. So I want to thank you, Jan, and everybody for letting me be part of the panel.
Oh, you were fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you were able to join us given where you are right now. Thank you. Okay. And another turn we're going to take. We're going to hear from Nancy Steorts. And you've written many books as well. And so can you remember that first book and the feeling of what you were doing?
I can. And I have always had on my to-do list to write a book. But I come from a different background in the fact that I was chairman of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, where I worked on all the safety issues and tried to make our country and our consumers safer. So with that as a background, I gave many, many speeches all over the country and all over the world on these issues. So my focus was, when I finally got my act together after I'd left government, was I need to write this book. Where do I go? How do I start? And I said to my intern, how would you like to have me? How would you like to help me write this book? Because he'd help me with my speeches and all. And he said, yeah, sure, I can do that. So this was the key to my writing 3 books. I had the material, we had to put it together, and my books are all very comprehensive on the safety issues. And the focus is the American public. And we're looking at children's issues, seniors issues, indoor air quality, medical, weather, et cetera. So it's very, very comprehensive, and it is very focused for lots of different people. The interesting thing that I did after we got the book published, after we got the book written, was I decided that why not go to Syracuse University Press, which was my alma mater, and see if they'd be interested. And of course they said, yes, we'd love to help you, Nancy. And for that, I am grateful, because they were kind of like what we were hearing earlier. They helped me with the editing and really getting it all together. And they also, once we got that finished, that was my first book, they then helped me market it and got a publicist, and that was terrific. So where my focus was not in the writing of the book, but then after, where do I go from here? Getting the publicist was great. And we did lots of book signings, and we did lots of speeches around it, and the media was very focused because of my background. But the interesting thing was, I thought, now what? And the corporations, that was a great market for my book, because it's something that they could use for their consumers, and they could put it in their products, et cetera. So that was a huge thing. But then I said to myself, what do I need where I can get thousands of consumers to buy this book? So I thought nobody better than the real estate world to look at that. So I went to the largest holding company in real estate, Realogy, and they thought it was great. And they endorsed the book, which was wonderful, and had me come out and keynote all of their conferences talking about consumer issues related to safety in the home, which was perfect. And then I used them as a catalyst to get the book into their residents. So that was very, very helpful to me. And I've had great success with these 3 books. But the thing I'd like to leave with all of you was that even though I was very visible, et cetera, I didn't have the lingo of the media and really getting the marketing going. So I met a man named Jack Canfield in California when I was giving a speech, and he suggested that I go to Steve Piersanti, who is one of the best companies to really help market books and really open up doors of opportunity. So, and I've left Steve's name in the chat because I think it could be very helpful to anybody that's writing books and really needs to be helped through the process. But writing a book is definitely fabulous. Being an author is fantastic because it certainly opens doors for you that could never be opened in any other way. So I hope that helps, Jan.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the information in the chat. And just to make sure everybody knows, there is a lot of information in the chat. So please, please take a look at it. Okay, our last two authors are first-time authors. So we're going to hear about their success and their challenges. And we're going to start with Rohini and in her new book, Leading Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. And as I am listening to everyone, I just wish I had the wisdom of Emily when I started to write. I wish I knew what to expect. So just listening to this panel is fascinating. Yeah, it is my first book, Leading Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, that actually came out end of November. And for me, you know, Emily, you described the different reasons why people write. For me, this was sort of an act of closure, an act of giving back to people that do the heavy lifting, the work of culture change in organizations, and in some senses a legacy. So it was an act of reflection for me. And, you know, and I was very clear about my audience. My audience was largely HR professionals, diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals, and leaders across nonprofit and for-profit industries. And what I realized, you know, what prompted me to write the book was when I would give talks, the one thing that kind of raised the most interest was doing this work on a global scale. How do you scale it? How do you do it across countries and cultures in terms of culture change? But that was also the thing that really frustrated people. So while there are a lot of academic books on global diversity, equity, and inclusion, there wasn't something from a practitioner's perspective. So my desire was to write something that would be really useful, practical. And so this story is very accessible because it has a lot of stories in it, along with some very practical advice. So in terms of, you know, what I wish I knew when I started doing this, clearly what I wish I knew was that writing the book is just a very small piece of the heavy lifting. The work starts after you've written, and the amount of work that you have to do to market the book is tremendous. I honestly had no idea. I thought this was done and now I could coast. But what I realized was one of the reasons my publisher, and you know, I kind of approached this in a very naive way. So I approached a publisher that my colleagues told me that this is Berrett-koehler, and they said that, you know, this is a publisher that's published a lot of books on this particular topic. And I reached out to them and I submitted a proposal, and within a very short period of time, they had accepted the proposal and it was a go. And I realized that one of the main reasons that they had accepted it was my network, the fact that I was well known in the field, and the fact that I had both a large email, direct mail database, but also a large following on social media. So, I mean, I think that again speaks to your point, Emily, about how publishers kind of evaluate what they're going to be doing. And that I realized was what I, you know, really needed to leverage post writing the book. So I would just say, you know, start building that particular database of yours in terms of your contacts. So what I have done is to leverage the boards that I'm on, for-profit and not-for-profit boards. And, you know, that has sort of legs because the individuals on the board then belong to other organizations. You know, I worked with a lot of organizations, associations, and their membership, which is a great place because membership, you know, really expands the thousands of people that you can reach out to. Universities that I've had contacts with and where I've given talks, I mean, they're the ones that actually look at you for using it in the curricula and if you have contacts with professors. So I think those are sort of some of the things that I would say in terms of leveraging. And then I think, you know, the book launch team, really be, you know, deliberate about who you want on that book launch team because they're your ambassadors and you want to really use your network, and then some to build that particular team. And then social media, I mean, I can't say enough about social media and leveraging it. I have a newsletter that goes out, and with every newsletter, I build my database of emails. So start thinking about different ways to build that database. And give something for free, because that's what entices people to want to belong to your database. So I actually have learn from my experience every other month, which is almost like a free consulting that I do. And I get about 110 to 130 people that sign on to this every other month, that they can ask questions ahead of time. And every one of them then signs on, and they become sort of, they bought the book, they sign on, but that's something that I give to them. And then I have other things, in addition to the newsletter, I have something which I call Learn from DEI Leaders, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leaders. So I interview someone and I post it. Many folks have podcasts, etc. So I think about how you sort of can give back in some ways. And the other piece I would say is, be really regular on social media, because this is a following you have your network, you have to keep feeding them stuff. So I've hired someone to do my social media, but we have a calendar where I post my speaking opportunities, I post endorsements. I have some really strong endorsements, including Indira Nui and the president of the conference board, and a couple of individuals from boards, and I have global endorsements. So I feed that in social media periodically. I feed pieces from my book. So I have these 5 principles in my book, and I'll pick one each month and do a story around that, a hero piece around that. Stories are amazing. They just really get people engaged. So, leveraging social media. And then I think the last thing I'll say on that is, speaking at associations, speaking at, different organizations that either you belong to or you can access. And what I have done at those, like WBC or the conference board and others, is I don't necessarily just speak about my book. I talk about my book in the introduction, and then I actually, have a panel that I bring together, and each of the panelists kind of expands on one of the principles in my book through their examples and their stories. So it's a great way, because the organization is getting great content. I'm collating this particular content piece for them, and it works really well. And it helps to both build your brand as well as sell the books. And then I would say that leverage your network for review. So that's one. The second one, very quickly, is publicist. I honestly wish I had gotten these leads and I knew more about hiring a publicist. I went with somebody that was recommended by the publisher, and I realized that it's not quantity, but quality that counts. Because quantity I can get, I can be doing a dozen webinars and podcasts, the requests come to me all the time and I have to keep saying no. But where I need them is really some big, the Wall Street Journals, the Forbes, the Fortunes, that's where I need them. So I would say evaluate your publicist well, interview them, choose them well, and then don't follow up on every single lead that they give you, be selective. So
those are great pieces of information. Thank you so much. For a first-time author, you're doing pretty well. Thank you. And our last author is another complete turn. We are going to be now speaking with Monica O'Neill, who has written a children's book, which is completely different than all the books that we talked about tonight. So, Monica, I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. And thanks, Jan. And hi to everybody. We're so glad to have so many of you here from so many different forums. And I'm thrilled to be here with such an auspicious panel. My day job is raising equity capital for private equity firms. So writing a children's book was something that had been in my mind for years, really. So Bear Needs a Home is actually based on my golden retriever. So it's sort of based on a true story. And I have rattling around in my brain a couple of sequels. He was a fascinating dog that had an interesting life. But I wrote the book, when getting back to Emily's point, why did you write the book? I wrote it. There's this story that was kicking around in my brain, but I wrote it during COVID, back in those months when we first went into lockdown. And if you remember, many people were actually adopting lots of dogs and cats and running out and getting pets. And because everybody was home, and I thought to myself, what's going to happen to all of those pets when we go back to normal and everybody goes back to work? And it reminded me of the fact that this golden retriever that I had rescued had been abandoned by someone, and hadn't been chipped or otherwise sort of identified, so they couldn't find his home. Anyway, it just sort of reminded me, it brought forward that emotion that I had about the dog that I rescued. And so there was a passion for the topic to try to write a story for children about the responsibility of being a pet owner. And I didn't want to go super heavy handed on it because they're kids, so you want to make it fun, sort of warm and fuzzy. But I wrote the book in, I think, April of 2020. So when we first went into lockdown, I wrote it in an hour and a half. So what I wish I knew, yeah, because it was, we all have that sort of cute little story. But what I wish I knew, to get back to the original question, I wish I'd known Emily because I ended up going the self-publishing route. And I'm happy to have done it because I learned so much, but boy, was it a lot of work. I didn't realize, I think it was Rohini that said writing the book was sort of the easy part, and it's all of the marketing. Well, we've all said it's the marketing afterwards that takes so much time. So the research I did was on self-publishing itself, the different groups out there. I went with a group called Outskirts Press, which is a woman-owned, woman-led, which is one of the reasons why I chose them. But there's Archway, there's Book Baby, there's a bunch of them. I mean, just go Google, self-publisher, and there's so many come up. Archway, as I found, was one of the more expensive because it's a division of Simon & Schuster. So I researched a bunch of self-publishers, and I think the big key, if you're going to self-publish, is what's your budget? So we've all thought, geez, these will be bestsellers and we'll make money. That wasn't really my intention, but you got to understand how much money you're willing to spend on this little pet project, no pun intended. And then the other, as Emily mentioned in her presentation, there were so many things that I didn't know. She was talking about the metadata, the BISAC code, which is the book industry standards and communication. You've got to know what that is, so Amazon knows what category to put it into. I had no idea. And let's remember, it was COVID. So you couldn't just wander over to Politics and Prose and go through the children's department. Let's sort of figure that stuff out. I eventually did, when the world opened up a little bit, ended up going to bookstores to identify what size did I want it to be, who was my audience, what age group. So I taught myself all of this because self-publishers are, they're just a vehicle. You really have to know all of that. You have to know, as Emily said, what paper weight do you want it coated, what size, what binding. You have to make all of those decisions, and you really don't get any aid. So you have to do lots of research ahead of time. So how much money are you willing to spend on this little project? And how much time do you have to research it and educate yourself on all of those decisions that you have to make? And then, as all of our panelists have said, the amount of time that you have to devote to marketing the book afterwards was really something I wish I had known. I never really intended it to be sort of a full-time job, but it certainly could be. I'm lucky that I've got a big network. I come from a big family. I've lived in a lot of places around the world, so I have a nice big network. And the book launch team was kind of informal. I'm very fortunate that a lot of my girlfriends have young children or have grandchildren. And so it was really through friends of friends and friends and friends sort of having their kids and their grandchildren buy the book and write nice reviews for it. So that's how I think I've done okay. I can tell you honestly, I haven't made my money back. But one of the nice things about that whole network is you'll find as it expands. I was introduced to someone who is a librarian, and she actually focuses on children that have suffered trauma in their early years. And she finds that my book helps with social emotional learning because it actually helps work through things like abandonment and rehoming and learning lessons and taking care. So that was just a happy accident that wasn't an intention, but just a nice upshot from my sweet little book. So those are my messages is, figure out how much money you want to spend and how much time you want to spend.
Wow, that was fascinating. So I'm going to ask Emily for help.
Yes.
Right now. So thank you all so much. And everyone gave such great advice, and your books are all a little bit different in many ways. And I think the audience appreciates all of it. So now we're going to open it up to our audience. And please, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat room. You can raise your hand. Who wants to start?
Oh,
yes.
I have a question. Emily, you mentioned something about uploading into KDP. What's that?
Well, KDP is Amazon's platform. So anyone can upload a file onto KDP and have a book that's published, essentially. You can make it available in paperback or ebook. Your files have to be formatted a certain way, but when we upload our books, we do it both with our distributor who distributes the books to the 39,000 retail outlets and to Amazon, because when we sell through Amazon, we don't have to give the distributor a cut.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. That was interesting. I didn't even know about KBD. We do have a question from the audience. I think it's from Adis. It is a question. Emily, you just read 2 memoirs, one by Ursula Burns and the other by Indra Nooyi. My first book is likely to be a memoir. I would welcome your insights on writing a memoir.
Well, I think you're certainly doing the right thing by reading other memoirs before you get started, because there are different ways to organize, memoir, and I'm certainly not an expert, but in my experience, what we have found to be successful are memoirs where you have developed enough writing skill to understand how to show and not tell, right? So that's a classic mistake that beginning writers make. And also where you are prepared to be vulnerable enough with your anecdotes and your real stories such that you keep the reader engaged and hanging on to your every word. Sometimes, when we have to reject memoirs, it's because people are not comfortable sharing some of them, the more awkward things that have happened in life. So I'd say be real. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We have another question, probably for you. They understand there's a global shortage of paper right now and that it's pushing back publishing of many different books. Is that true? Have you heard about this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's affecting everyone. And it's not just the paper, it's the whole supply chain, right? It's the trucking, it's the, so that the books don't get to the warehouse and the warehouse doesn't, the books don't get to the retail outlets. But paper is a real issue, and our distributor is now making available a third option. We have white, cream, and I forget what the third option is called, but it's that gray, coarser paper that you see like in middle school books, because they simply can't get the white paper right now and cream paper. Yeah.
Ah,
It's crazy.
That's a big issue.
Yeah.
that's
Wow.
huge.
So we have another question, I think is from Nina. I have noticed that most reviews are either very well-known people or from previously published authors. So what does it take for a first-time author to get reviewed by a major press?
So your publisher has to, either your publisher or a publicist is putting your book in the hands of the potential reviewers. And to be honest, I hate to say it, but like so many other parts of the world, it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And so if you're working with a publicist or a publisher who knows people, you know, in that media outlet, or knows the right people and can get your manuscript in front of them, for an unknown author, that is a huge part of the battle.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I have an answer.
Hey, Nancy, go ahead.
That's a very good question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And one of the things, and particularly with this audience, all very successful women, you have a network that is untouched with really top people.
Yes.
And what I did was, when I finished that book, I thought, I am the best of the best. All of these people know you. All these people are going to be very helpful if you just use them. And I used the top people I could get my hands on, and they were thrilled, because not only did they give you a great endorsement after they read your book, but they also then marketed it to all their people, so that you didn't really need the media. And then the media will come behind you, and it's like a rolling stone. Is that not true, Emily?
Yes, that is very true, Nancy. Yeah.
Yeah, we also have another one about the publishers. It says that Denise is asking, I've heard that many major publishers are really only taking on whoops, it just went away. So sorry. Are really only taking on influencers like TikTok stars and leaving everyone out in the cold. Can that be true?
Yeah, it can be true, and it is kind of true. If you go into a Barnes and Noble store now, you'll find that the books are covered with the authors who've been writing and producing, you know, those best-selling books forever. And there's really very little on the shelf from new authors. They're just not willing to take that risk anymore. So yeah, it is true. But I would also urge you to think about this, and that is, especially women, especially in the areas that many of you would write, if your story, whether it's a memoir or your experience in business or even fiction, touches the life of another woman in some positive way, has impact in some positive way, I would argue that is all you need to justify the investment. You know, that
That's right.
you should do it because you love writing and because you want to share your experience, and you should do it to have impact in the world. And whether or not you recover your investment or you get to the New York Times bestseller list, I would not put that at the top of your list. You know, I have a story of a woman she was agonizing over whether she should, you know, pay to publish the book and hire the publicist, and her husband was going through his midlife crisis, and he bought a Lamborghini, and they could afford it, and it made him feel good. And so she thought, why am I agonizing over this? This is important to me. I want to do this, and I'm going to do it because it will give me joy. And she did.
I love it. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
That's great.
I love it. We have another question. Any recommendations? Sorry, it's hard to read when they keep moving the screen on me. Any recommendations for finding and selecting agents for like a young adult fiction, especially? You have any recommendations?
Is that for me?
I believe it is, yes.
So I don't have as much experience with agents as, you know, some of the published authors here, because we tended not to, use agents in my part of the publishing business. I mean, again, you really have to know someone to get in front of the agent. I've talked to agents who have thrown away manuscripts unread because they simply can't keep up with the volume. And so I would suggest that that query letter is critical, and that first paragraph is critical. And so if you have a book that is like another book in the market, go to that book, find the acknowledgements, who was the agent on that book, look for those kinds of ways to put yourself in front of agents who may have interest in what you're doing. You really have to capture their interest in that first paragraph.
Okay, do we have any more questions out there? Any questions for the authors? Okay, hold on. I think we have one new message. Okay, one more question here. Emily, what does a hybrid publisher like you provide the author for that 60% of the royalty fee?
So the 60% of the royalty is what you receive, from the sale of the book. At Bold Story, a hybrid press will charge you anywhere from between $8,000 and $30,000 to publish your book. And at Bold Story Press, we charge $10,000 upfront. If you need, that covers the editing. If you need really intense editing, there may be another charge, but that is the upfront investment. And remember, a traditional publisher is recovering that investment before they start to pay you that 10%. And then at the end of the process, you get 60% of the royalty and we get 40% of the royalty. So that's the way we're set up.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. I think we got a little backwards on there. Thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
We have time for one more question. Anybody?
I have one quick question, Jan.
Sure.
So Emily, back to you. I don't know if you publish children's books, but one of the things that I found most fun in writing my book is finding the illustrator that actually sort of captured the essence, really what I was looking for. Do you help people find an illustrator as well?
We do. Yes, we do. And that, we really think of the illustrator and the author as being co-authors. It's a very much a collaborative effort. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, we can't thank you. Thank you all. You have been fantastic. And we are just so honored to have so many people join us tonight, and also honored to have so many people from other forums within IWF. Just to notice before the chat goes away, please take whatever you need from there so that there's some great information in there. And then last but not least, Emily's information is also on there. And again, you can reach her at Bold Story Press. Anybody have any more questions? And Krista, Betsy?
Thank you, everybody. I thought it was a terrific conversation. Yeah, one last question there from somebody.
Can I be a member of IWF? It's an awesome group. Thank you.
Well, you were terrific, Emily. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, everybody. Hope you have a great night and you walked away with some really great information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.